bladder.
Go bladder.
Charity Hospital. I was gonna have modesty get it for you.
Oh, weird. 1 second. I think I almost got it. It's just for whatever reason it's chosen that as a speaker. Oh, that has a headphone jack. That's why. Okay, cool. Oh, weird. Okay. Okay. We're live. Yes.
We're live.
We're going to talk about Saint Job of Chive, who is one of the saints that gets commemorated in the vigil services and on feasts at the Liturgy. And we're also going to speak about the saints of the day, Adrian and Natalie. So, Mariska, Maureen, you were going to do Saint Job of Chive.
Okay. So we'll just pass it around, icon of St. Job. So, St. Job is beloved by the Carpatho-Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians, and the Russians. He's abbot and wonder worker of Chive. St. Job is remembered as a defender of the Orthodox faith, an ascetic, spiritual father, miracle worker, abbot of the great monastery of Chive, located today in western Ukraine. St. Job was born in 1551 with the name of Ivan Zhelezo, which means iron, to a family of pious Orthodox Christians. At the tender age of 10, he left his parents and asked to be received into the monastery of the Transfiguration in the village of Pidhora, the Carpathian Mountains. 2 years later, at the age of 12, he was tonsured as a monk and given the name Job. Monk Job proved himself worthy of the monastic tonsure by his exemplary way of life, and when he reached the age of 31...
So, question. Tonsuring at the age of 12. Any thoughts about that?
It sounds like an exception.
I think it was kind of an exception, and 12 was like older in those days, too. Now, you can show a picture of Monastery 1. This is...
So, what's the problem with tonsuring youths?
Well, they could change their mind later, and then
Okay.
and in this country and some other countries, there's been problems with
Abuse.
abuse of young men.
Mm-hmm.
So,
When they're immature.
This is the monastery he went to.
that's and he stayed there quite a while, from 12 to 31.
To your question, yeah, I think immaturity is, I think the vast majority of 12-year-olds would not necessarily have the full capability of understanding what it means to live the full monastic life, and they would need
Right.
time. Well, that's why you would do, you have the different ranks of monasticism, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like novices aren't tonsured into anything.
So he could
Well,
be
they-
novice.
The tonsuring, so I guess the question is, what are the ranks or orders of monasticism, at least in the Russian Orthodox Church?
Well, as soon as you're tonsured, you're not a novice, you're tonsured.
So you start out a novice.
Sorry, novice.
What's a
Sorry, I'm
novice?
late. Sorry, I'm late.
You've made a commitment.
You may put-
Even
Well,
if-
the novice has not made a commitment. The novice is
Right.
there to
learn.
discern whether or not he or she has a monastic calling.
Right.
And that's through a combination both of the individuals discerning, do I feel called, do I still feel called, as well as the abbot or abbess and the master of novices, the other senior monastics determining it. So the novitiate, you're free to leave the monastery at any time and return to civilian life. What's the next step?
The stima, something.
No.
No.
Rasa forma.
Where else? Okay.
The Rossifor monk, the novice will wear a cassock and a belt. The Rossifor monk, in addition to wearing the cassock and the belt, will wear a riasa. Now, a riasa looks just like what a priest or a deacon wears, bishop too, for that matter, because even though priests and deacons may not be monastics, they are clothed in a rasa at their ordination. So, a little more about what's the distinction for a rasa monk. Have there been commitments made?
Yes.
Yes,
Some, not
Some.
final.
it's not final.
It's not a lifetime commitment?
No, a Rossifor monk can return to civilian life.
Do they have to go through some sort of ceremony to unbecome a monk?
No, it's still a period of determining whether or not they wish to make final vows.
Don't a lot of monks who just stay Rossifor monks most of their lives?
Well, some do because they don't want to be ordained. But that is not necessarily a protection against ordination. Bishops can still lay hands on you. But yeah, Father Lawrence in Jordanville stayed a Rossifor monk up until his deathbed because he did not want to be ordained.
So now he's schema monk John.
At his deathbed, he was tonsured into the schema. Yes. What comes after Rossifor?
Schema.
No,
Let's go with the
another
small
one.
schema.
This is Russian practice.
Right.
The mantia, the lesser schema. And this, in the Russian church, this is by far the most common monastic tonsure where vows are made for a lifelong commitment to monasticism. And they're just basically called monks or small schema monks, and they will live in the monastery. They'll do whatever. They'll do all kinds of stuff. They maybe go off and be a hermit for a period of time, but they will return to monastic life. This is where most of the clergy get ordained. Monastic clergy get ordained as schema monks. And they get sent wherever. Most of the bishops are pulled from the schema monks. Not the schema monks, the lesser schema.
Lesser schema.
And they basically are the bulk of the Russian Orthodox monastic order. And then you get to what?
Then it's the
Great
great
schema.
The great schema. Now the Greeks, I believe, or at least some of the Greek monasteries, will tonsure monks straight into the great schema.
Oh.
I think that's what they did with Natalia Katerina.
Yeah.
She was a novice for several
And the
years.
Serbs will do this.
Mhm.
Archbishop Anthony of San Francisco was tonsured into the great schema in Serbia.
Oh.
And he could have worn the great schema mantia and cowl, but he was a serving bishop, and so he chose not to do that. I believe when he died, he had a monastic funeral as opposed to a hierarchical funeral. But I don't know that. I can't remember that for sure. I think I was told that.
Interesting.
But most great schema tonsors in the Russian Orthodox Church will be when someone has an illness or they're close to death. Because the monastic tonsure carries, along with confession, it carries forgiveness of sins. It's like another baptism.
Huh.
Although, of course, it is not another
It's not another
baptism in the
baptism.
sense that we only have one baptism
Right, right.
for remission of sins. But a monastic tonsure will free people from sins. And that's why people will do it. Occasionally, you'll find that they don't die and then they come back out. But the schema monk in the Russian church is supposed to live a very strict life. You'll find most of the solitaries are schema monks.
Mhm.
And even when they have people gathering around them, they will not live they'll live more like in a hermitage or something like that. They'll be around, but they won't be all living in the same building. They'll have separate rooms. And their whole purpose is prayer.
Is there a custom against having bishops from that rank of?
Yeah, when you're tossed into the great schema, you have left the world behind. But there have been
Sometimes it involves anyway.
situations where like an archimandrite might be yanked out of being a schema monk to be put in charge of a monastery for some reason. So he'd be a schema archimandrite. One of the new martyrs is a schema monk, or a schema bishop. Schema bishop Macarius. He was, I think he was consecrated in secret for the catacomb church. And that sort of thing will happen from time to time. But for the most part, the church likes to leave the schema monks alone so that they can, in fact, live a solitary life. Because the fact is that both an archimandrite or a bishop are going to live very public lives. They can't really escape from the world, and that's somewhat incompatible with, and Archbishop Anthony said this, he told me at one point, I'm a schema bishop, I can't get away from the world. So, anyway, I just wanted to go through that.
Right, okay. So, after reaching the age of 31, he was ordained a priest. Father Job came to be known and trusted by a local nobleman who was a defender of the Orthodox faith, Prince Konstantin Ostrowski. After repeated requests by the prince, Father Job was transferred to the monastery of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross, located on the prince's estate, outside of the town of Dudko. Here Father Job served as abbot of the monastery, and along with caring for the spiritual growth of the brothers, he devoted his time to writing and publishing theological books, sermons, and instructions. Father Job especially devoted his writing to combat Protestant heresies, which were circulated throughout the region. It was Father Job's blessing that Prince Constantine published the first printed version of the Slavic Bible, known today by scholars as the Ostrog Bible. So I guess you need to put monastery 2. During Father Job's 20 years at the Holy Cross Monastery, which I take a picture of. A number of Orthodox bishops and priests signed the infamous Union of Brest, in which they abandoned the Orthodox faith for unia with Rome, creating a new Uniat or Greek Catholic Church, which was neither Roman Catholic nor Orthodox. The lands of what is today known as Western Ukraine were part of the Roman Catholic Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The rulers of these lands desired to further control their subjects by ensuring their allegiance to their own Catholic faith. Further, many Orthodox clergy accepted this union with Rome because, as Catholic clergy, they would receive economic and social benefits and a higher standard of living. In this struggle, let's see, it's pretty much repeating the same thing.
The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, where they became Union.
St. Job was strong in spirit and faith, and not in vain that such multitudes of people from all over the world come today to his holy relics, which lie in a reliquary near a cave that he prayed on Pochaev Hill. So, he goes to Pochaev. The Pochaev Monastery had been established years earlier at a place hallowed, now you can put in Monastery 3, but you should note that this picture of the monastery is after it got all adorned and fixed up and fancy. It did not look like that when Job, I couldn't find a picture of what it looked like.
No, they don't have a
When
picture
Job
of that.
went there, but, yeah. It's a pretty big one.
That's huge.
Yeah, pretty big one.
So the laver is one of the large lavers in the Russian Orthodox Church.
So anyway, the Theotokos appeared to the monks in the shape of a column of fire and left the imprint of her foot in the rock she stood upon. From this rock flowed a stream of water with miraculous power of healing. By the time Father Job arrived at the Pochai Monastery, this was becoming well known as the home of the miraculous icon of the Theotokos, known as the mother god of Pochai. So it was kind of a famous place. And I'm going to pass around the picture of the icon, what it might have looked like before it was covered up, and what it looks like in its fancy coating.
Keep reading.
Okay. So as Father Job's reputation and fame grew throughout the region, he increasingly sought quiet and solitude. It always seems to happen. These saints just, when they want to go away, that's when they become famous. And to avoid the praise around people, he knew well the warning of the Lord. Woe to you when everyone speaks well of you, for that is how their ancestors treated the false prophets. So Father Job was attracted by the monastery of Pochai, which then was in the remote wilderness, and monks lived alone in caves while working out their salvation and then joining together for the divine liturgy in the church of the Dormition of the Theotokos. Father Job moved to the Pochai Monastery around 1600, and despite his attempt to remain unknown and unnoticed, he was elected as their abbot. Father Job, by his example and life, attracted other brothers to the monastery, and he worked endlessly for their welfare and the material stability of the brotherhood. St. Job zealously fulfilled his duty as head of the monastery, being kind and gentle. He did much of the work himself, planting trees in the gardens, strengthening the waterworks at the monastery. Apparently he did some interesting things with water. His days were given to manual labor and his nights to prayer, as described by one witness, Josephus, who kind of the original author of this life, although it's been. For by day he exercised himself with constant handiwork, such as planting, grafting trees, tending orchards, building ponds, and afterwards at night the favorite of God would give himself over wholly unto the Lord. So it sounds like he was praying all night, working all day. Father Job especially loved to retreat into a remote cave, far from the people and distractions, and pray and be alone, as Josephus records. And if this cave of stone had a mouth, it would be able to tell us how sometimes for 3 days at a time, sometimes for an entire week, shut up there alone, nurtured only by the tears which flowed from his pure heart, he prayed there for the good estate of the world which lies in evil. While Father Job engaged in the work and prayer, he had to fight off attacks on the brotherhood by roving bands of Tartars who succeeded in plundering the monastery and beheading one of the monks. The fathers then faced attacks by the Protestant grandson of Anna Goskaya, who seized the icon of the Mother of God and attempted to remove the monks and steal their land. Just as he strengthened the Orthodox people from Protestant errors while the abbot at Dubno, Father Job continued these efforts at Pochai. The Orthodox people of the region faced pressure to join the Catholic Church throughout the newly established Uniate Church, as one by one bishops and priests succumbed to the Union. At this time, the printing press at Pochai Monastery was the only one in the region, and Father Job used it to produce prayer books, sermons, books of Orthodox teaching to strengthen the faithful against Catholic proselytizing. On October 21st, 1651, Job received a revelation from God that in 7 days he would depart from this life. On October 28th, after having served the divine liturgy without any illness, he peacefully fell asleep in the Lord at the age of 100. He was glorified as a saint in 1659, and his incorrupt relics are venerated to this day at the Pochai Monastery in the stone cave where he spent so much time in prayer.
Glorified only 8 years later.
Only 8 years later.
8 years, yeah.
So I'm passing around the picture of
Is,
the cave.
yeah.
At this time, but tens of thousands of people flock to the monastery each year on October 28th, his feast day, and also August 28th to honor the Blessed Theotokos on the feast of her Dormition, to venerate the icon of the Mother God of Pochai, which apparently they got back, and to venerate his sacred relics, and to continue to be a source of miracles for the faithful, according to the testimony of his disciple Josephus, the author of the life of St. Job. Once while praying in his cave, the saint was illumined by the heavenly light. The Troparion is...
I don't, I've got some more on his death and canonization instead of the miracles.
Yeah, I have some on his miracles too.
Did you wanna,
I'll go to the miracles and then you can...
yeah.
Okay, so, during the Tsar's War in 1675, the cloister was besieged by Turks who reputedly fled upon seeing apparition of Theotokos of the Mother God, accompanied by angels and Job. Numerous Turkish Muslims who witnessed the event during the siege converted to Christianity afterward. One of the monastery chapels commemorates this event. In the Battle of Pochai during this war, Theotokos and Job are depicted above the monastery defending the cloister while the battle rages below. In 1759, a coach of Count his name anyway, capsized near the monastery walls. In a fit of anger, Potocki fired at his driver 3 times, all without avail, attributing the failure to divine intervention. Potocki settled in Pochaviv and started lavish gifts upon the cloister. In 1773, Potocki, who was a Roman Catholic, petitioned the Pope to recognize the Pochav icon as miraculous and Job as a Catholic saint. Only the former petition says right. I don't know if you call that a miracle. Okay, that's all I got. Oh, wait, there's one more. Job repeatedly appeared in a vision in front of the bishop and blessed the holy mysteries.
Yeah, there's another one.
Okay.
When he died, after his death, he appeared 3 times in a vision to Dionysius Balaban, the Metropolitan of Kiev, and instructed him that God wanted the Metropolitan to uncover the saint's relics. After the first 2 visions, Metropolitan Dionysius did not follow the order. Only after the 3rd, when Job threatened him with misfortune should he continue to disobey, did Dionysius see in it God's will. The same day, the Metropolitan departed from Chive and gave orders to open the grave immediately. That took place on the 28th of August, 1659. His body was found to be incorrupt, emitting a wonderful and heavenly fragrance. The relics were taken to the Trinity Cathedral of the Lavra for veneration. The second uncovering of the relics took place on the 28th of August in 1833, at which his relics were solemnly transferred to a church consecrated to his honor, which had been built at the Pochav Lavra. And then I talked about how people come. The other thing to keep in mind is that the print shop of the St. Job of Pochav at the Holy Trinity Monastery was dedicated to him. It was the principal press of the Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia.
Mm-hmm.
So were they connected with the,
Monks came from Pochav.
yeah,
Also to Metropolitan Vitali's monastery in Mansonville. Yeah, there was a definite connection. I think Metropolitan Vitali, I can't remember if he was tonsured at the Pochav Lavra. I think he might have been. He was tonsured in Kharkiv, Russia. He went from France where he'd grown up. After doing his military service, he went off to the monastery in Kharkiv, Russia. I believe Archbishop Seraphim of Chicago was tonsured there at Pochav.
That's close.
There were a number of the monks and clergy, for that matter, that fled the communists, and they came out of that area. Of course, that whole area, there was all kinds of conflict between the Polish and Lithuanians on the one hand, Roman Catholics, and the Russians and Orthodox and Ukrainians on the other hand.
And then, of course, the Turks came.
Well, the Tartars went everywhere.
what faith are the Lithuanians?
The bulk of them are Roman Catholic.
Hmm.
The dividing line is pretty much the border between Poland and Russia. Lithuania is now a rump state, created after World War II. It's north of Poland. But there's also in the 19th century and the 20th century a great number of those former Uniates who converted back to Orthodoxy, in large part because of the activity of the Pachai Monastery, which continued for several hundred years. And when they came to this country, even more of them converted, and they largely ended up in the OCA. If you look at the roots of the leaders of the OCA, they're largely coming from Ukraine, Lithuania, Czechoslovakia, those kinds of places.
I have a question about the icon. You showed what it might look like. But I
Well-
wonder when the icon has a Riza over it, can that never be taken off? Can what's under never be looked at?
No, the Kurstrud icon,
I've seen pictures of that without the Riza.
it has had the
Ox-
Risa removed several times. The Risa does two things. One, it helps to protect the icon. And then two, it's a way to embellish it, because the Risas will typically be made out of silver or gold or platinum or some valuable metal.
Mm-hmm.
And more often than not, they'll have precious and semi-precious gemstones attached to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Greeks like to hang coins in front of the icons.
And little tokens of miracles.
Yes.
Well, Russians do that too.
And you really have to remove the Risa to clean it. Because you know, silver polish getting on an icon.
No.
Yeah, so basically when I searched for your Mother Pachai icon, I got both of these. And this one, you can see the footprint
Mm-hmm.
ah,
On the rock.
on the rock.
Mm-hmm.
Compared to this left.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, you can't see that at all.
Well, it's a different icon.
It's a different icon, yeah. Anyway, sometimes I think it's a shame when they cover so much of it.
Other questions about St. Joe of Pachai?
You know what, I looked all over for any of his writings, because he had writings and it talked in one of the things about the something in St. Job's own hand or something. And a lot of things referred to it, but I couldn't find any parts from it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what happened to his
Yeah,
writing.
it sounded like when he was starting to publish, he was publishing his own
Yeah.
sermons and things.
Yeah, he was.
But he was also publishing a lot of other, you know,
You
stuff.
think if
from
anything
other-
still existed, the St. Joe print shop would have it, or at least.
yeah.
Well, it's undoubtedly been printed multiple times, and the bulk of it's in Slavonic. The question would be, is any, how much of it has been
There's the
translated?
thing, it could be in Slavonic still, probably from Holy Trinity, probably get it from the bookstore.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so I was looking in English.
The man lived 100 years old. In
Yeah.
that day and age, in that location, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah,
God wanted him doing work, I guess.
I guess so.
He wasn't finished.
Right.
Okay,
All right, now we get to,
the Martyrs, Adrian and Natalie, whose day this is.
is their picture?
Can you?
I got an
see
icon.
that
Yeah.
around? And here's a map. They're from Nicomedia, which you'll see.
So is that Nicomedia or is it Nicomedia?
That's a historical map. That's nice.
The Martyrs, Adrian and Natalie, were married in their youth for 1 year prior to their martyrdom. I don't know why they wrote that. Anyway, they lived in Nicomedia during the time of the Emperor Maximian. The emperor promised a reward to whoever would inform on Christians to bring them to trial. Then the denunciations began. The 23 Christians were captured in a cave near Nicomedia. They were tortured, urged to worship idols, and then brought before the praetor. I don't know what that is. It's some kind of office.
The praetor, it's like the Praetorian Guard, it's the court yard of the guard and the governor. It's brought before the governor is basically what it's saying.
Adrian was the head of the praetorium, and he watched as these people suffered with such courage for their faith. Seeing how firmly and fearlessly they confessed Christ, he asked, "What rewards do you expect from your God for your suffering?" The martyrs replied, "Such rewards as we are not able to describe, nor can your mind comprehend." Saint Adrian told the scribes, "Write my name down also, for I am a Christian, and I die gladly for Christ God." The scribes reported this to the emperor, who summoned Saint Adrian and asked, "Really, have you gone mad that you want to die? Come, cross out your name on the list and offer sacrifice to the gods, asking their forgiveness." Saint Adrian answered, "I have not lost my mind, but rather I have found it." Maximian then ordered Adrian to be thrown into prison. His wife, Natalia, knowing that her husband was to suffer for Christ, rejoiced, since she herself was secretly a Christian. She hastened to the prison and encouraged her husband, saying, "You are blessed, my lord, because you have believed in Christ. You have obtained a great treasure. Do not regret anything earthly, neither beauty nor youth." Adrian was then 28 years of age. "Nor riches. Everything worldly is dust and ashes. Only faith and good deeds are pleasing to God." On the pledge of the other martyrs, they released Adrian from prison to tell his wife about the day of his execution. At first, Saint Natalia thought that he had renounced Christ and thus had been set free, and she did not want to let him into the house. The saint persuaded his wife that he had not fled from martyrdom, but rather had come to give her the news of the day of his execution. They tortured Saint Adrian cruelly. The emperor advised the saint to have pity on himself and call on the gods. But the martyr answered, "Let your gods say what blessings they promise me, and then I shall worship them. But if they cannot do this, then why should I worship them?" Saint Natalia did not cease to encourage her husband. She asked him also to pray to God for her, and that they would not force her into marriage with a pagan after his death. The executioner ordered the hands and legs of the saint to be broken on the anvil. Saint Natalia, fearing that her husband would hesitate on seeing the sufferings of the other martyrs, asked the executioner to begin with him and permit her to put his hands and legs on the anvil herself. They wanted to burn the bodies of the saints, but a storm arose and the fire went out. Many of the executioners were even struck by lightning. Saint Natalia took the hand of her husband and kept it at home. Soon an army commander asked the emperor's approval to wed Saint Natalia, who was both young and rich, but she hid herself away in Byzantium. Saint Adrian appeared to her in a dream and said she would soon be at rest in the Lord. The martyr, worn out by her former sufferings, in fact, soon fell asleep in the Lord. Saints Adrian and Natalie are the patrons of married couples, as are Saints Timothy and Mara. The Kikos Monastery on Cyprus has a portion of Saint Natalia's relics. The rest of it is just,
Footnotes.
Okay.
yeah.
So a couple of interesting things there. Was Adrian baptized?
Doesn't say it.
Be converted.
Does any of this sound familiar to our day?
What do you mean by our day?
20th century, 21st century?
Well, I know that in some parts of the world, people are being tortured and killed for being Christians.
New martyrs.
Well, of course, but I mean, even that, right in the present day.
People being put to death, but what's going on now where people are basically being told, renounce, just go along with what we're teaching here or what we're doing there.
Mhm. Yeah.
The persecutions of the true Orthodox. What happened in Greece over the last century to the true Orthodox who were faithful to the church calendar and then ultimately through that to a stand against ecumenism and a stand for the Orthodox faith. Against Masonry. There are Greek martyrs. They are not of the Turkish yoke, that are of the 20th century.
Mhm.
And they were killed precisely because they were faithful to the church.
Haven't some Christians been killed in the Holy Land?
The
Recently?
Christians being killed in the Holy Land, right and left.
Yeah. I thought maybe when you said you were talking about a specific story that we could think of where husband and wife.
Well, yeah.
I'm sure husbands and wives have. I just can't think of anything specifically.
So that's another good question. Who's the stronger Christian here?
Well, Natalie's pretty strong. She encourages him all along the way.
Kill him first. Let me hold it, put his hands in the animal.
I
in the
know,
animal.
yeah. And then she thinks he's not going to go through with it. And
Yeah,
she's-
when he
she's
gets
like,
out of prison.
Well, I don't want you in this house if you're. I thought that's interesting.
And she was a secret Christian. What do you know about secret Christians?
That's often mentioned, but I explain what they mean. I mean,
I mean,
obviously they're,
presumably nobody else.
it's a secret, but how do they?
It does not tell us, it does not tell us how she
How she was
became Christian or
baptized.
how she was baptized.
It's not-
But I mean, there's other saints, particularly women, who they're going to be forced into a marriage with a pagan, and by their fathers, especially, and their fathers will torture them and kill them because they refuse. Saint Catherine, among others. Christianity appealed to women a lot. And they could get away with it. I mean, why wasn't Saint Natalia taken and martyred by the soldiers? She's standing there. They've got to figure she's a Christian.
She's encouraging him.
She's encouraging him. Why didn't they lay hands on her?
She was rich and beautiful.
Okay.
But there've been plenty of cases where the minute it was known, then they were snapped up.
Yeah, that's true. The persecutions are not always evenly applied.
They never are.
They never are. Men will always get it. They'll get it in the head. Women can get away with things that men can't. Why were the myrrh-bearing women able to stand at the cross when the apostles are skulking around hiding for fear of the Jews?
I just figured the women were stronger.
well, the soldiers might be like, oh, they're just, some helpless, weak women. We don't have to worry about them. Kind of
Exactly.
thing.
Right.
Exactly.
Meanwhile, with him, he has probably more social standing, more influence. So if they let him get
He's
away with
the
it, then
commander of the Praetorian Guard.
After we let the commander
yeah,
stay in, yeah,
There's no way they're gonna let him off.
right.
Just like they wouldn't let St. Andrew off, even after he whipped the Persians with a small force.
But in his case, they kind of wanted to, I mean, they were reluctant to.
Well, they were afraid that the army would
Because the
mutiny
army would mutiny.
behind a successful commander.
Right, exactly.
Mm.
Yeah.
In this particular case, it's the Praetorian Guard that is doing
They're doing the
the
persecution.
torturing, and so they're not too concerned about a mutiny from the commander.
So he wasn't Christian before, his wife was secretly Christian. Did she tell him before?
It doesn't
It
say.
doesn't say, and, he converted right there at that moment,
You can
Very-
very upon watching all these
watching all the
martyrs.
martyrs.
Uh,
And I know this happens, and there's other lives it seems where this happens, but,
well, there's plenty of soldiers and officials that witness the
it would-
faith
Mhm.
and then become
and
just,
or even the actual torturers themselves.
exactly.
Yes, yes.
it is kind of interesting.
Yeah, they were married 13 months, but that, if
Yeah.
she was really a secret Christian, it might have been a secret from him too.
It might have been, yeah.
They just don't
Well,
say
she
it.
may not have told him that she was a Christian, but you can bet that she made a Christian home. And you can convey the faith, or the essence of the faith, without explicitly saying this is Christian. Love your neighbor. Forgive.
Mhm.
These are basic concepts. Be charitable. Help the poor and the needy. Visit the sick. All of these Christian virtues, if the soul is open to them, will have an impact. Adrian clearly, while he may have been a pagan, while he may have been a soldier and the head of the guard, he was a righteous man. And that's why witnessing the persecution and interrogating the Christians of what do you expect, which in itself doesn't seem like, well, that doesn't sound like it would convert many people, but it's just the thing that tips the balance enough. And he says, because he immediately says, write my name down too.
Yeah.
So he was clearly prepared for reception of Christianity, and especially for martyrdom.
So I have to believe that, the example, if you will, of Natalia in the home, the Christian home, as you
Mhm.
say, helped him to come to that conclusion.
Very
at
clearly.
that time.
Mm-hmm.
It was nothing new with the woman. I am he who you were looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You didn't want him, he made it.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
take me. Yeah.
Yes.
I've been reading the Russian Golgotha, and the introduction was really interesting, because it was talking about how with early Christians in Rome, the Romans viewed Christians as opposed to their political power.
Mm-hmm.
When really it was, we just want to worship our God. We'll give you
Yep.
what you want.
Yep.
But they didn't view it as that. It was, oh well, you're a threat because you won't worship Caesar or whatever.
You're treasonous.
Yeah, which is basically the same thing that happened in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Because they thought, oh, well, you're not following the church that we've established, so therefore you are a political threat.
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of what's going on today.
Mm-hmm.
Because they won't, we can't go to church because you're opposing our political power.
Mm-hmm.
I know you're hurting everybody else too.
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of the same thing with Adrian and probably with the Christians that he was speaking to. They view it as you're opposed to our power, you're a threat.
Well, the Roman Empire never understood Christianity. They didn't actually believe much in the civic gods, but they looked at the worship of the gods as being, and especially the divinity of the emperor, as being loyalty to the state. We all have to worship the same gods. If you're not worshiping our gods, then you're a potential threat to the security of the state. And there's lots of, it's not just the Romans, there's lots of governments that feel that way. They feel threatened by an allegiance to something that is beyond their control. And a god is always beyond the control of the civil authority,
Right.
unless they can control the gods, which is what they tried to do. And that was part of the problem of the breakdown in Rome in the 3rd century, that nobody believed in the gods anymore.
What year was this?
Well, there's some dispute. Yeah, this life was giving it in the time of the 305, the first decade of the 4th century. It could also have been in the last decade of the 3rd century. It's that same. It's under the Diocletian, under the regime.
I didn't get into those footnotes, but these scholars, they see differences and then they start doubting that things even happened.
Yeah, I know.
And it's ridiculous. Because there was a Maximianus.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the same that came up with the other
Yes.
last week. The main thing is the decree that I looked up is that the decree by Diocletian explicitly against Christians was in 303.
Right.
And the second Maximium something or other came to power in, I think, he became Augustus in 305.
Right.
He was Caesar in 303.
Yeah, but the fact is, even before 303,
Right.
there were regional persecutions.
Absolutely.
Right.
They just made it official.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And-
that's what you're saying, it's 298 or 303.
Yeah. Throughout up until the Edict of Milan, in what was it, 313 or whatever it was, where Constantine says Christianity is legal, persecutions will stop. From the time of Christ up until that point, persecutions would flare up anytime somebody wanted your property, or they wanted to curry favor with somebody more powerful than them,
Rally the people to a cause.
rally the people to a cause, attack a group that maybe was getting to be too wealthy or too powerful, or somehow or other not us, or
Distract your own feelings.
distract your feelings. There's a famine, there's a drought, there's whatever. It's blaming the Christians. All of this stuff was going on, and I think it's Trajan. The governor, someplace, and I can't remember exactly where, was asking, well, what should we do with these Christians? And the emperor writes back saying, well, the Christians, they're despicable. And then there were other times when, we need somebody to blame.
Convenient scapegoat.
Rome's burning. We gotta blame somebody.
Gotta keep them around so they can be conveniently located for just that purpose.
Yeah. So, interesting. So why did she die? She
Yeah.
lived like less than a year or something like that.
That was interesting, because it said something about after her struggles,
It took a toll on her, all that.
her husband.
Well, the Roman pagan wanted to marry her,
Right.
Right.
and so
Right.
she fled, right?
Oh, that was another thing that happened. that, you know, you kill off the husband.
Right.
We don't believe in monasticism or being single. Women are there to obtain property and wealth and power.
Right.
So there's an eligible widow, she's pretty to boot. Go for it, which is what the guy does. And presumably he would have been, if he was in favor with the emperor, he would have been granted, oh yeah, and then she could complain all she wanted, but it wouldn't have done her any good, which is why she fled.
And the wording of that was a little strange. It talked about struggles, but I got the idea, well, God was basically protecting her from that marriage.
That's right.
But I wasn't unclear what it meant by, it almost sounded like she'd been through some kind of torture too, but you think it was just the,
You don't think
having your husband tortured is
The
what you,
strain, yeah.
the strain, yeah. Yeah, that would be,
that's a struggle?
yeah.
Keeping the hand, she kept it for a relic,
Yeah, she kept it as a rule.
but knowing, I mean, she believes him to be a martyr, which he is,
Right.
but at the same time, I mean, she's going to rejoice in that, she's encouraged him to that, but don't you think that there would still be some sorrow at
Of
the
course, yeah.
loss of her husband,
Yeah.
the separation of death? We hope in the resurrection of Christ that we will all rise again, but it's still hard to look at the body in the coffin as you're putting it to bury. There's still feeling there.
Of course.
Well, it wasn't Saint Sophia granted a martyr's crown because she had watched her 3 daughters die?
Yep. Well, I think she was also martyred, wasn't she?
I know. I think she passed away. It was a couple days or a couple months
Okay.
after her daughters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's another one who
Same for him.
pushes them forward to be killed.
Yeah. I find it hard to have that kind of faith. I don't think I could hold you down.
Well, it's different when that's actually happening.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You would, you,
Hopefully I would know.
you would rise to the occasion,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
so
I
to
think
speak.
God would probably give you the strength for that.
Well,
Right now,
I
I
think
can't.
that, you know, the first thing we would do is flee or hide.
Yes, that would be the first step. Because yeah, I'm not one to
But
just.
then you never know.
You never know.
There are martyrs, like
Martyrs that say,
Saint Ignatius, who
"Go-
go
go get it."
cheerfully to their
Yeah.
martyrdom. He's writing epistles as he's going to visit city upon city, as he's being taken over from Antioch to Rome to be martyred.
But he knew what was his destiny.
Yes, he
That
did.
there was a certain spirit of prophecy. to
That's
it.
right.
Yeah.
Mm.
So,
And if that happened to you,
Then you do it.
that's how you would,
That's
you
always
would how you
no.
would respond.
Okay.
mhm. Other thoughts, comments?
I can't imagine what it'd be like pushing your children forward to be martyred. Like, I think that if it was my children, my motherly instinct to protect
Yeah.
them from harm would be pretty strong.
Yeah.
So, but then again, if you think about it, on the opposite side, if you don't, then you've been presented the opportunity and you have, in a way, rejected God, and that would be worse.
Yeah, what if you've taken away their faith, what's their life gonna be worth?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, you think about Abraham.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even on a, not quite as a severe, they're not martyrdom, but the parents of the Theotokos make a vow to God,
They gave her up when she was only 3.
and they fulfill the vow by giving her away.
Yeah.
And they're not the only ones that
It's
did
faith.
that.
Samuel, his mother.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of youth and monasticism, I don't know about the tantra, but many who actually went to a monastery young and were raised there.
Yeah, I was gonna say something along those lines. In the first millennium, it was not at all uncommon for children, what we would consider to be children, and teens, to go into monasteries. If you read the Ladder of St. John, Climacus, he talks about, there's a whole section or a whole monastery,
Extra building.
yeah, for beardless youths. And Sinai had the same sort of thing.
Mhm.
And there's other monks in the desert who went in as youths.
Well, as we were, maybe it wasn't here, I don't know, but at one point we were talking about, perhaps it wasn't here, the connection between orphanages and, we did, because it was
Orphanages and
in
convents.
convents.
Yes.
Yes.
And so it's not uncommon, it hasn't been uncommon for youths to grow up near a monastic community and decide to join that rather than go into the wider world.
Right.
But presumably most of those youths have that choice at some point, whether they want to stay.
Well, you always have a choice whether or not to accept a tonsure.
Right.
You can't be forced into monasticism. Well,
It's-
there are some instances
It's-
where that was
I was
like
thinking of some cases where it
Sophia, the
happened, but
sister, half sister of Peter the First, was
It's the form
Forced.
of exile.
there was some political, yes.
but that's not the Orthodox
That's
way.
not-
and that happened in Byzantium as well, or
Oh, absolutely.
Constantinople.
Oh, absolutely.
The alternative was to kill these people.
Yeah.
But really, in an atmosphere of faith, a young teen is growing up and looking at their future and feeling the stirrings of their own
Yeah.
identity. And,
Right.
you know, nowadays people, one of the reasons that looks odd that they might be interested in monasticism is because the world regards monasticism as odd.
Right, no, that's-
But if it's in an
Yeah.
atmosphere of the church and of faith, it's not the
It's
It's,
same.
not.
it's one of
Right.
one of the options that is definitely considered.
That's right.
I think also one of the things with comparing the children then and children now is the expectations that were placed on children then. They had much higher expectations, I think, than they do now, in terms of responsibility and acting like an adult. So
Well, that's what
I
I meant by 12-year-olds who are older.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
thinking of the brothers Karamazov, where the younger brother,
Alyosha.
Alyosha, yes, in the
How old was he? He was in his late teens, wasn't
He was in his teens.
was he when he started going to the monastery?
Not when he was visiting the monastery
Yeah.
for youth.
Yeah.
Well, that's a blessed environment, and it's one we don't have. But,
Right.
Right.
but that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Any other final comments, thoughts? So, next week, next Wednesday is the feast of Saints Anthony and Theodosi of the Kiev Caves.
Mm.
They are commemorated in the Sable God commemoration list. It also happens to be their feast day. One of them.
Isn't it also the church New Year?
No, that's Tuesday.
Oh, that's Tuesday.
Which the other saint on Wednesday is John the Faster, Patriarch of Constantinople. Now, what can you tell me about Saint John the Faster?
I'm guessing he fasted.
There you go. And then he was patriarch. Tuesday also has an interesting saint.
St. Simeon Stylites.
Yes.
Who?
St. Simeon Stylites.
Oh, those are people that stood on a
Pillar.
pillar, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he was the first.
He was the first.
Hmm.
I think somebody needs to take Anthony and Theodosi of the Caves to be the ones that we commemorate.
I will.
Okay, and then somebody want to take either St. John the Faster or St. Simeon the Stylite?
I think St. John the Faster.
Okay.
I don't have.
I could do it again, St. Simeon.
Okay, yeah.
Would we have enough time for 3?
Well, if we don't, then we'll carry over,
Mm.
but, we're running 20 to 30 minutes per, which is okay, that's about right.
Mhm.
And, I'm willing to cut this session short a little bit, but, we could go
We could go till
a
later.
little bit longer than this,
Where'd you
too.
get these? Do you have a colored printer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't.
Okay, well, I'm gonna.
Well, if you send, us the link for the icon, we can print it off on our color printer.
They don't look so good in black and white.
Mm.
Well, they're
Something like.
less colorful.
That's true.
Shall we say a prayer? Shall I stop the stream?
Yes.
No questions?
What?
No comments?
No, nobody joined.
To bless thee, the Theotokos, ever blessed and most blameless and the mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, and beyond compare more glorious than the seraphim, who without corruption gave his birth to God the Word, the very Theotokos, thee do we magnify.
Thank you all.
So, did you make a recording of it?
It's recorded on YouTube, like everything else.
It always does, it always records.
No, this one's not gonna be very good because multiple times it dropped out. The network connection was not very stable. 10, 15 minutes with a solid screen.